Thanks so much, Holly. I deeply
Thanks.
appreciate you and great intro here. And I'm very excited to be with y'all tonight. It's a privilege and honor. It's definitely a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So, I'm grateful to be here. And really, the topic tonight is around identifying, owning, and shifting your triggers at work. And today, what we'll go through is how to identify your personal triggers at work. Explore the role you play in your workplace dynamics in these experiences, the 3 key moments that will help you unpack the triggers, and how to find a workplace that supports your need for personal and professional growth. And so, a bit about me. I'm an executive coach to women, to ambitious women. I've had a coaching practice since 2017. And most recently, 6 months ago, I founded a community for ambitious moms and moms to be called Chief Mama Officer. I'm also a former HR executive as well as customer success leader in tech. I have over 15 years of experience as a strategic operator. And a fun fact, personal fact about me is that I'm just getting started on the mountain bike. I used to be a triathlete, as in I did 2 triathlons. and I recently picked up mountain biking and I love it. I actually much prefer it over road biking and tri biking because of it being on trails versus the road. I feel a lot safer on the trails. And so my land acknowledgement is for the Salish and Kalispel people. I live in Missoula, Montana, in western Montana, and it is definitely a place where many people here move here because we do feel very connected to the land. We are nestled in between 5 valleys, and I actually am friends with a few indigenous folks here. And so it's definitely meaningful to me that Holly asked me to include a land acknowledgement here. So it would be remiss before we dive in if I didn't include a trigger warning for a talk about triggers. Some of the stories that I might share or the solo activities that I'm prompting may bring up some emotions, distressing memories, or experiences. And so, again, I appreciate all of you showing up here tonight. It shows a commitment to your dedication to your own inner work and well-being. So thank you so much for being here. And so really, if any of the content or solo activities become too much, you are more than welcome to leave. You can leave the talk in itself, or you can just take a step away, go outside, take a breather, just do what you need to do to be able to, be present here in the moment. And so as a reminder, this is being recorded. You can always come back to it. Okay. So with that said, the first interactive exercise is I would love to hear from y'all in chat. What are you hoping to learn today from today's talk? What compelled you to come here tonight and spend your time with me learning about identifying, owning, and shifting your triggers? I want to know I'm not alone in my triggers. Yes. How to feel more agency in situations that have caused me to shut down. Yes. Greater awareness to identify the triggers so we can have the reflection space later to understand them on a deeper level. Great. Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Learning how to deal with unnecessary comments at the workplace professionally. Yes, absolutely. So, identifying triggers. This is the first component to the talk tonight. And again, would be remiss if I didn't actually define what a trigger is. It's a person, place, thing, or situation that elicits an intense or unexpected emotional response. It causes an individual to possibly relive a past trauma, consciously or unconsciously. And so today's talk is going to focus specifically on internal triggers. These are the personal emotions, past wounds, or insecurities that resurface, such as feelings of shame, feelings of rejection, guilt, imposter syndrome. And it could even be not even, a trigger from someone's behavior. It could also be sensory stimulus, like your environment. It might elicit a reaction like smells, crowded places, body-based responses. Like as an example, here, environmental stimuli I still feel the impacts of the pandemic. Or if I'm in a crowded space inside, I start to contract and get really anxious. And so that is an example of environmental stimuli. So any behavior, experience, or sensory stimulus can be a potential trigger and lead to a fight or flight response, right? Getting into that fear space to keep you safe. And so I do want to call out that internal triggers are different than external triggers. So situations or societal factors that activate a response, such as blatant discrimination or cultural media messages. Unfortunately, I imagine that many of us have experienced blatant discrimination in male-dominated industries. I personally have. And so just centering us that the talk tonight is about internal triggers, about our own emotional reactions, past wounds that arise in these moments. The reason why we're focusing on that is because we have the most agency over the internal triggers, and which brings me to a core belief that I have, which is our outer experience is a mirror reflection of our inner world. In other words, whatever internal beliefs we create about ourselves based on our experiences, our external reality will mirror them. They will reflect them. Luckily, we have agency in addressing those internal beliefs that no longer serve us in our well-being going forward. So for context, I'm going to share 3 distinct and recurring triggers that happened across my career, and then how it led to 3 key moments in how I uncovered those triggers. So my first story is about when I was a management consultant in 2012, and I was on site at a client, and we were in their conference room, in their boardroom, and I had 10 teammates at the table, including our managers. And we were at the wit's end with this project. The night before, I remembered that there were a few colleagues of mine, and we were up until 4 a.m. wrapping up a current state deliverable, and we hadn't received much direction or support from our senior manager on the project. So that next day, we thought that deliverable was complete, and I just started working on a future state deliverable. And in front of everyone, the senior manager asked me what I was working on. She called me out. So, I told her, I'm working on the future state deliverable. No one else is, so I just went ahead and did it. And she redirected me in front of the entire group. Hey, Jennie, I really need you to be working on that current state deliverable and wrapping that up. You shouldn't be working on this future state deliverable. And so in that moment, I felt my heart racing, my face blushing, my eyes welling up with tears. And so I remember I couldn't hold the tears in any longer. I got up from my seat and rushed out to the bathroom to cry it out. And I paced in the bathroom back and forth, looking at myself in the mirror and thinking to myself as tears are streaming down my face, what did I do wrong here? She didn't give us any direction, so I went ahead doing what I thought would have been helpful for the team. So I felt totally ashamed that the work that I was doing on this project would never be enough, even though I was spending 80 to 100-hour weeks pouring my blood, sweat, and tears into this work. So that afternoon felt like it lasted forever, and I couldn't accept that that was just what happened, and that the way I reacted and had to run out of the conference room, it was so embarrassing. And in fact, I felt regret that I reacted that way and wish I could have controlled my reaction. I thought that it was a career-limiting move. Fast forward 2 years to 2014. This is my second instance here. So this was a new company that I was at. I made a transition from management consulting into tech. I wanted to get my foot in the door, so I took a job with a manager who seemed like he might be an asshole during the interview process. And unfortunately, a month in, he proved that to be true. We were in a team meeting where I shared a client deliverable, and he called me out in front of the team. It was a small team, a few guys and myself. And he said, Jennie, this analysis is rudimentary. And I again felt the heat rising on my face and body, heart racing, and started to fear the tears swell up in my eyes. And on my way to the bathroom, I tried to control the tears from running down my face as coworkers were walking by. And once I got to the bathroom, it was such a cathartic release. I just cried it out silently. There were other people in the bathroom, and I felt horrible. I felt embarrassed that I didn't meet his expectations, even though I thought that the analysis was completely fine, especially since he failed to give me his time, direction, and coaching around it. So unfortunately, it still led me to feeling like a complete failure as a new hire on the team. And guess what his gaslighting advice was later that day? It's never as bad or good as it seems. Huge eye roll, right? In retrospect, I didn't last at that job very long, only 9 months. Fast forward 2 years to 2018. So I'm at a revenue leadership team offsite. This is a new company. This is my third tech startup that I'm at. We're talking about customer churn. That's my area of ownership as the customer success leader. My style of leadership is to listen first and then respond. I'm a little bit more introverted in that sense. And so I was listening to the team talk about the problems at hand, and our boss, the chief revenue officer, calls me out. I need to hear from you on this, Jennie. You need to have an opinion. So you might guess, the same shame came up, and this time I tried to sit with it actually at the table with my team. I tried to hold the tears back, and yet again, the tears just became overwhelming. And guess what I did? I got up and ran to the bathroom again. I literally was about to speak up and share my point of view, and he called me out. It was such a freaking disaster. So really, I'm curious here. You probably clearly see the pattern here, right? So across the course of 6 years, a similar scenario happened 3 times. And in fact, it happened a couple other times as well. So the trigger here, the behavioral trigger here was being called out by an authority figure, by my boss in a group setting. And really what that led to internally, this internal trigger of shame. I've done something wrong. I've been bad. I'm not good enough. I'll never be good enough. My work will never be good enough. I'm a failure. And what was the consequence of all of this? Actually, it was depression. I got in a really bad spot mentally and also physically. I was languishing as a human. And these career experiences kept happening and happening and happening. And this really led me to my calling to explore my triggers. I had to do something different here, to dig them up and look at them, because anytime that I went to a new place, a similar thing was happening. So here's the inner work at hand. You need to uncover your triggers so that you can own and shift your response to them at work. Why? Why is that important? Well, there really isn't a cure for triggers, right? They happen. We all have our unique human experiences, and all we can do is to identify when we're reactive and having a negative emotional response. And then try to understand it a bit better, try to understand why this is happening, and then to manage our own emotional reactions. And at its heart, triggers are a reaction to past experiences. And our emotions and our emotional triggers alert us to perceived threats in our environment. So in my own exploration, I found that there are 3 key moments in the journey of identifying, owning, and shifting your triggers. The 3 key moments are the aha moment, where you have that rock bottom and then the epiphany, the healing moment, which is sort of an up and down, peaks and valleys, and then this growth moment where you do improve and get clarity on how to move forward. So I'll share my own aha moment related to the 3 stories I just shared. I realized that my work environment is a mirror reflection of my childhood family dynamics. And this is the blush emoji is really expressing like, oh my gosh, whoa, mind blown. And really, those toxic bosses were representations of my parents. I was called out at the dinner table for bad behavior. And this also, I would say the toxic bosses also equaled teachers or coaches throughout my childhood or even in high school or college, right? Who would call me out in front of a group. It just continued to repeat in all these different scenarios. And then another aha moment is that I perceived authority figures as perpetrators and bullies. And I was the victim, right? That I was at the mercy of the bully and the perpetrator. So how did I arrive at these conclusions? I started to look, inquire, and investigate my own emotions. So looking at that, emotions will go into the 5 universal emotions here, where all humans, no matter where we were raised, we all have these emotions in common. These are emotions that if anyone here has seen the Pixar movie Inside Out, will be familiar with. Those little characters: joy, anger, sadness, fear, and disgust. They all keep us safe, and sometimes they will take control, right? However, research shows that even just naming our emotions helps us deal with stress. And awareness of our emotions and mindfulness around them, they're key to understanding why we feel threatened and how we can deal with those triggers in a healthier way. So here's the first activity. I invite you for the next 2 minutes to reflect on an emotionally charged situation from work from the last week or so and label the emotion. Was it disgust, fear, sadness, joy? And you can even get a little bit more granular with the emotion. Was it overwhelm, frustration, embarrassment, shame, guilt? When we think about and we reflect on these emotionally charged situations, right? The key here is to accept the emotion, right? To accept that anger, right? It is okay to feel angry right now, to accept that fear, right? And so, did you know that feelings and emotions actually only last 90 seconds? The onset of an emotion to the arc of the emotion to the tail end of the emotion, 90 seconds. Research suggests that that is the length of the biochemical response cycle of an emotion and the actual physiological reaction. However, our subjective experience of emotions can feel much, much longer for several reasons. The same emotion may be re-triggered through our thoughts and our own interpretations, our stories, our narratives, our beliefs about ourselves. Emotions can also transform into moods, which are longer lasting but less intense states than emotions. And then emotions also vary significantly in duration based on the specific emotion. Sadness tends to last longer than anger, as an example. Individual differences in emotional processing, the significance of the triggering circumstance, and our own coping mechanism and emotional regulation skills. So just wanted to preface that emotions last 90 seconds. And actually, the Latin root of emotion is to move out, right? So emotions are expressing through us. And really the key here is letting go of the need to control your emotions or repressing them, right? Because sometimes, like in my own experience, when I repress the emotions, it's sort of like a kettle pot, and then it eventually explodes and like have a moment of rage. And really it's being able to allow yourself to express the emotion, allow them to last the 90 seconds, right? Notice any thoughts or interpretations or stories or narratives that are arising around it as well. So here's following up on that last activity, right? The emotionally charged situation, right? And this is our safe space, our safe container here, yeah? And curious if you notice the emotion itself, right? Lasting 90 seconds. And as you're bringing it up, I invite you to notice any thoughts about yourself or narratives about the other person or whatever the situation is, beliefs about yourself or the other person. What's arising in these 90 seconds? All right, and inviting all of us to take a deep and big exhale together and releasing that experience. If you're taking note, right, of any of those thoughts and narratives and beliefs about that emotionally charged situation, the last step in investigating your emotions is to examine your beliefs that drive that emotion, to examine the beliefs around the anger. Like, what is leading me to have this experience of anger or shame, right? Beliefs operate at both conscious and unconscious levels, and they fundamentally shape how we interpret and respond to situations. And so here are some key belief systems that influence our own emotional experiences. Core beliefs about our own self-worth, such as I am worthy or unworthy of love and respect, such as I am competent or I am incompetent, or I am fundamentally good or bad. Beliefs about others, such as people can be trusted or cannot be trusted. Others are judging me or others are accepting me. Or people are generally helpful or people are generally harmful. There's beliefs about the world, like the world is fair or unfair, or life is meaningful or meaningless. The future is hopeful or threatening. And then there's expectations and standards, such as I should always succeed and be perfect, or bad things shouldn't happen to good people, or others should treat me with respect. And then there's also beliefs about emotions themselves. Negative emotions are dangerous and harmful, right? They should be controlled, not expressed. Expressed vulnerability is a strength or vulnerability is a weakness, right? Emoting is a weakness. That was actually a belief about emotions that I had growing up, that being sad was bad. Like that was not okay. Like stop crying. So these belief systems create the cognitive frameworks through which we interpret events and ultimately determining whether we experience joy, anger, shame, pride, or other emotional states in response to similar situations. And often becoming aware of these underlying beliefs is the first step to addressing persistent emotional patterns and triggers. So let's take 2 minutes here and reflect on the beliefs that you have about this emotionally charged situation and what's possibly driving them. All right. Hopefully that was an insightful exercise here. And so I wanted to wrap up the aha moment, the first of 3 moments around my own personal story here, where I examined the triggers I experienced with both my mom and dad and the beliefs driving my emotions around those triggers. So I actually, rather than reflecting on the experience that I had in the workplace, I went direct to the source of where I inherited this trigger and the pattern and those really unproductive beliefs about myself, right? That I'm unworthy, that I'm a failure, that I'm I'm an embarrassment, all of that, right? And so really I explored, the triggers like with my dad, the triggers with my mom, and I did all this inner work within myself and not actually like interpersonally with them, but I did all of that reflection within myself. And so now how did working on my own personal history play out in the workplace? That leads me to the second moment of the healing moment. And so what the healing moment is when you start to equip yourself with skills to cope within these toxic workplaces or with colleagues who don't understand the impact of their behavior or actions or non-actions. So a simple tool to start out with here is to go out for a coffee chat with the person whose behavior triggered you, understand their story. It humanizes them beyond their role at work. And really, I do want to say that don't go beyond your level of own personal safety here as well, right? If your system really feels unsafe with this person, right? This is not necessarily a tool that you would use, right? So I just using your own judgment here around, okay, like, can I build a foundation of relational hygiene with this person, right? Or just a baseline level of relationship. And so some questions that you could ask are, what's something about your upbringing that shaped you? Or what brought you into this field? What's your favorite part about your career journey? Or what do you love to do outside of work? Because sometimes when you start to humanize the other person, right, it's less transactional, right, and more relational. And so some of the benefits here is that it might reduce in misinterpretations and misunderstandings, increase empathy, increase trust, create stronger relationships, and it encourages more open dialogue. And so the next tool that I'm going to share with you is actually the game changer here. And I'll share with you my own case study at the end of this section. But really, this tool of clearing conversations. So when you experience a negative reaction to someone's behaviors or actions, you can use a clearing conversation. So what is this? It's a dialogue that you initiate with someone whose behavior triggered you. And the goal is to share your truth, own your experience, and co-create a new path forward. I will share a disclaimer here is that this is not the tool to use if it has been blatant discrimination or harassment, right? That is an escalation immediately to whatever your HR protocols are, right? So reporting it to HR and or your manager. But I do want to share that again, like the work here in this talk is more about the internal triggers, right, of our own personal reactions versus like a blatant discrimination type of trigger. So that said, these clearing conversations for me were very important to the growth of my own career. And I will share you the exact steps here. So feel free to screenshot the screen here, right? So preparing for a clearing conversation requires reflection here, right? So reflect on what happened. What were the facts of what happened? And what was my reaction to the facts? What was my story about it? What was the interpretation of it? And what did I feel, right? What was the negative emotional reaction? And what would if I were to say anything to this coworker, like what would I need to say? What would I need to express to them? And what do I want to request going forward? This is honestly, the most important part of the conversation is making an ask at the end of how you would like to see how they show up or to shift their behavior. So really here, this clearing conversation is being able to take 100% responsibility for your own reaction. There were a few comments in chat earlier during the talk about this, right? Of being able to own our own reaction, right? Versus blaming the other person. And then also the frame of mind going into this clearing conversation is wanting a win-win resolution between the two of you. What would a win look for you and what would a win look for them in this relationship? And then something else to be mindful of going into the conversation is that it might get emotionally charged on your end, on the other person's end, right? So usually when I prepare for a clearing conversation, I actually, have my entire script written down, right? And I don't usually deliver it virtually, and if it's in person, right, I've already reflected on it and read through it a few times. And so I ground myself before the conversation, right? There might be some nerves that arise. And so as much grounding as possible. And then also be prepared for the person just not getting it, right? So in my own experiences, I've had hundreds of clearing conversations with my colleagues, and 80% of the time they've worked and 20% of the time they haven't. So just be prepared for that. However, again, like the point of a clearing conversation is that, it's okay if they don't work. It's you showing up 100% for your half of the relationship, right? And so this is your desire to want to repair the relationship, right? Both with yourself and with the other person. So here's a script for you, okay? And actually, this is the first part of it is to give them a mental heads up asynchronously, whether it's through, Slack or Microsoft or, text. I have something I want to clear with you. I'd like to have a conversation with you about what happened the other day, or I'd like to have a conversation about, something you did and I had this reaction to it, right? Like when's a good time to connect, Yeah. So it gets them a mental state. So they don't feel that they're like getting, caught in the blue with this conversation that you want to initiate. And so here's the script. It starts with an intention. It goes into the facts, the interpretation, and the feelings and the request. So I want this positive outcome in this relationship. I have something to discuss with you, or I have something to clear with you. What happened was ... The story I made up about myself is, or the story I made up about you was, I felt this when that happened. And going forward, I would like us to ... So again, this one's a screenshot worthy screen here. And yes, one of the questions here is important, necessary to have difficult conversations in person, or do video calls work? Yes. I think it also depends on your working environment, right? If you're in person, hybrid, or remote. And so, a practice that I also appreciate doing, which I mentioned later here, is when you have a relationship with someone at work, asking how they like to receive feedback at the beginning of the relationship. And if, you've been working together for a year or two or whatever, right? Just asking, like, how do you want to receive feedback if you haven't had that dialogue too, because then you might be able to, address that feedback or the clearing conversation, right, in the modality that they like to receive feedback or prefer to receive feedback. I will share an example of the script, and then I will repeat the question here and then address it. So here's a sample script here that I have actually used in one of the scenarios from before. So my intention, I want us to have an honest working relationship. So I have something to clear with you. And of course, before that, I gave him a heads up, like, we need to talk. Here's the fact. In the meeting earlier today, you called me out in front of the rest of the team. Fact. The story I made up about myself is that I did something wrong, and I felt a lot of shame. So this is the interpretation as well as the feelings. And going forward, could you please give me feedback directly instead of in front of the group? Request. And so this particular clearing conversation had a positive outcome, right? He didn't realize that I preferred receiving feedback directly in, one-on-one versus in a group setting. So that made expectations and how we can work together clear, right? So before I go into the next slide and how the clearing conversations have really actually accelerated and supported my career growth, one of the questions here is curious if you've had a clearing conversation that made the relationship worse in the end, or have you found them to only have neutral to positive effects? So this is so relevant for this group for WIMDI. So majority of the time, the clearing conversations, again, 80% worked, and there's, I guess, so possibly the 80-20 rule here, but there was one person, an executive, who happened to be a man, who just didn't get it. He, when I initiated a clearing conversation with him, his response was like, Jennie, that didn't happen. Like, that wasn't true. So really, it was this experience of me getting gaslit of like, oh, so you're saying that my own emotional reaction or my own experience of what happened, like, isn't true, isn't fact. Yes. And so I had to stop that conversation in that moment and just be like, okay, like, let's stop this, right? I'm going to leave this conversation now. I don't think it's productive. And then, I attempted again a month or so later, and it again, like, had a similar response. So in that moment, I just had to set a boundary, and I was just like, And I was luckily in a place where I could set a boundary and just make a decision like, I'm just not going to collaborate with this person. And, and this was a person, I wasn't in HR at that time. I was in a different function. But a person who repeatedly was reported to HR a couple of times for his behavior. And so in any case, there's just going to be, unfortunately, people who just don't get it. Even though like the intent is I really want us to crush it at work together, and I want us to build incredible things together to drive client outcomes, right? Or to drive this business forward, and then just falls flat sometimes. So that's where the facts are really important, right? And if someone can't respect it, then that's on them, and that's them failing their half of the relationship. That said, I do want to share, though, that the clearing conversation, I was at this company for 6.5 years, and I actually started out as a director of their customer success team. And I had over 100 clearing conversations with my colleagues there. Mostly men, I would say. Probably 90% of them were with men about their behavior that impacted my experience at work. And if I hadn't had that tool, I would say that scenario that I shared with y'all earlier about how my chief revenue officer called me out in that team meeting, I probably would have left the company. If I didn't have that tool, I would have just run away again, right? That fight or flight response is like, I'm going to flee, like, screw this company, I'm going somewhere else. But it takes a lot of courage to have these clearing conversations. And so, garnered up the courage and was like, okay, I'm going to talk to my boss about this authority figure about this, and give him feedback about that experience, right? And I had to have it multiple times with my male bosses. And really it led to like my career growth, where I was able to like share my truth and the feedback, right, of how they could better work with me and how we could better work together to create better outcomes for the company. And not let, the interpersonal dynamics really slow us down a bit, right? So I was laterally moved into HR, given my passion for coaching. I was running the talent development function, and then I got promoted to vice president to oversee the people team, and then eventually I left the company as a senior vice president. And so I share this tool with you because it can be transformative, not only for yourself, but also for the well-being of your relationships at work. And yes, it is. It can feel very exhausting after the conversation, right? Like just priming yourself that yes, it could be emotionally charged. And so there's exhaustion, there's a little bit of like vulnerability hangover, a bit of relief, right? Like, is this person actually going to follow through on this co-created agreement, right? And I will share, though, that I think this led to more trust in those relationships where the clearing conversations did work, where, we could go to each other when these situations happened. So it's hard to initiate, though, at first. But once you get into the practice of them, it sort of becomes like second nature. Okay, so that said, the growth moment here is the third and final moment. And this is when you realize that you've outgrown people and or workplaces. So if you hit a wall or breaking point with your current company, you'll probably want to find a new company that supports you and your values, or just start your own. And, what does the consideration for you to really reflect on is, what does respect look like and feel to you? How would you like to be treated? And is this an expectation that you have of your other colleagues, or is it actually spoken of, right? Is this an agreement? And so really getting clear on the feeling state of respect, right? In what scenarios have you felt respected, right? Are there any people in your life that treat you really well, right? And what does that feel like? So this is how you find your next place to grow. Here are the red flags where, you're possibly looking and searching for your next gig, right? And you look on Glassdoor, there might be a high, people talk about turnover. It's a key word in their Glassdoor reviews. There's poor communication, unclear expectations, micromanagement. Like all of these are keywords that come up in Glassdoor reviews. No life outside of work, gossip and or politics, and they might have a lower Glassdoor rating. And then for green flags, places that recognize their people, right? Transparent communication, clear expectations, psychological safety, work-life integration, leaders living values and the mission. And you'll see, again, these keywords in Glassdoor reviews and usually a higher Glassdoor score and a higher approval rating of the CEO. So again, I'll leave this up for a moment. So if you would like to take a screenshot, feel free to. But what I'll leave you with here is the most important thing for you to get clarity on is, how do you want to feel? Like, this is the key part of the growth moment is, do you want to feel appreciated? Do you want to feel valued, seen, heard, recognized, fulfilled? What's that desire core feeling state? And whatever it is, what would you have to believe about yourself to experience that fulfillment, to experience feeling appreciated, right? That you are worthy of recognition and appreciation, right? So how do you want to feel, and what would you have to believe about yourself to have that experience? And so my growth moment story is that in 2017, I quit my job and became a certified coach. I went through this intensive coaching program, and the desired feeling state here was feeling freedom, flexibility, authenticity, fulfillment, feeling worthy, right? What I had to believe about myself is that I am worthy and capable, and I have every right to share my voice and opinion. And then in 2024, last year, I outgrew my HR executive role. And then I decided to jump corporate ship and become my own business owner and go expand my coaching practice into full-time coaching. It's my joy, it's my passion, it's my calling. And so that's, again, the similar feeling state of aliveness, freedom, flexibility, authenticity, and fulfillment. And really here I had to believe that, yes, I'm capable as an entrepreneur, right? That even though the corporate handcuffs, the income handcuffs, right? I'm worthy, even though I'm not like making what I'm making, in my corporate role right now in this moment. So I wanted to share, some of my own personal journey there, and to recap the 3 key moments here that helped me get there, and I want to help you get there too, are the aha moment and phase, where you identify your triggers through emotional intelligence and mindfulness, remembering that emotions only last no longer than 90 seconds, to label the emotion and to understand the beliefs driving your emotions. And then the healing phase, which is practicing relational hygiene by getting to know your colleagues and turning expectations into agreements, facilitating clearing conversations. And finally, the growth phase, where you get clear on how you want to feel in a workplace and what you would have to believe about yourself to have that experience. Again, I will round it out here. Just for all of us, you are worthy and deserve to be treated with respect. And that is a truth. That is a birthright for all of us. So that said, I'll leave it at that. And again, so grateful for your time and attention and engagement, and really grateful for you all sharing so beautifully, so vulnerably, and appreciating Holly for having me. Thank you so much.